At Thanksgiving dinner, my brother Luke smirked at me and said, "At least I make this family proud," while I quietly paid their mortgage. I stood up, walked out, and stopped all payments the very next morning. Let me explain how we got to this point, because what my family didn't realize was that they just insulted someone with the financial resources and professional connections to systematically dismantle their comfortable assumptions about who held the real power in our relationship. I'm Aaron, 31, and I work as a senior financial analyst at Henderson Corporate Solutions, earning $89,000 annually while managing investment portfolios for high net worth clients. For the past 5 years, I've specialized in forensic financial analysis, identifying discrepancies in complex asset structures, and building evidence packages for corporate litigation cases. My job literally involves investigating people who think they're smarter than the system and proving them wrong with methodical precision. Growing up, my brother Luke was the golden boy. Star quarterback in high school, business degree, always had the spotlight while I stayed quiet and focused on building actual skills. My parents, especially my mom, would light up whenever he walked into a room like they were greeting royalty. Meanwhile, I was just Aaron, the dependable one who got decent grades and never caused drama. The real irony was that I was the one quietly keeping everything afloat financially. When my dad had his health scare 5 years ago and had to cut back work, the bills didn't stop coming. So I stepped up, started covering their $1,840 monthly mortgage, plus utilities averaging $320 per month, and various medical expenses totaling around $800 monthly. It was supposed to be temporary help, just family taking care of family. But the longer I helped, the less they seemed to notice, or maybe they just decided it was owed to them. Luke never contributed a single dollar, despite showing up to holidays in designer suits talking about conferences in Dubai and Toronto. He'd brag about his latest business ventures, while I sat there knowing I was covering his parents' basic living expenses. That Thanksgiving started like all the others. I arrived early to help prep, and Mom barely acknowledged me beyond directing me to mash potatoes. Luke showed up an hour later with expensive wine and his girlfriend Danielle, drawing all the attention while I set the table and handled the actual work. Dinner was the usual routine of Mom bragging about Luke's career moves while he acted like he'd invented entrepreneurship. Then Mom mentioned how nice it must be to live alone, implying I had it easy. I made a small joke about the mortgage fairy helping with that, trying to brush off the subtle dig. That's when Mom's expression turned cold and sharp. "You know, Aaron, you've always acted like you're doing us some huge favor. You're not. You're just a burden. Always have been." The whole table went silent. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard her. But before I could respond, Luke chuckled and delivered the line that changed everything. "At least I make this family proud." Something clicked in my brain, the same analytical clarity that kicks in when I'm reviewing fraudulent financial statements. I put down my fork, pushed back my chair, and stood up without saying a word. I grabbed my coat, walked out, got in my car, and drove home in complete silence. The drive home was eerily quiet, but my mind was racing through calculations. Over 5 years, I'd contributed approximately $156,000 to their household expenses. That's $156,000 in after-tax income while being called a burden and told I don't make the family proud. The mathematics of disrespect were suddenly crystal clear. I sat on my couch that night doing what I do best, analyzing the situation with professional detachment. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource, a utility that provided financial services without requiring acknowledgement or appreciation. The moment I stopped being useful, they'd already shown me exactly how they'd respond. Monday morning, I took action. I canceled every automatic payment connected to their household. The mortgage auto pay, utility transfers, insurance premiums, everything. I deleted bill reminders from my calendar and removed their address from all my financial accounts. No drama, no explanation, just clinical execution. 3 weeks later, my dad called. He never called me, so seeing his name pop up felt significant. His voice was stiff and annoyed when I answered. "Aaron, why is the mortgage unpaid?" I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. "Ask your pride and joy." Then I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening and telling. No one reached out to ask if I was okay or if something was wrong. They expected me to crawl back the moment consequences hit. like my absence was just a temporary tantrum they could wait out. 2 days later, Mom texted, "We need you to sort out the mortgage before it affects our credit. Don't be childish." Childish, not "we're sorry" or "let's talk." Just a command wrapped in an insult. I left it on red. Through my cousin Rachel, I started hearing the narrative they were spinning. Mom was telling people I was having mental health issues, that I was unstable and lashing out. Classic deflection, casting me as the problem rather than examining their own behavior. The most insulting part came at Christmas. They held their own gathering without telling me and posted smiling photos on Facebook with the caption, "Grateful for family, some people may leave, but the ones who matter always stick together." I wasn't hurt anymore. I was strategically engaged. That's when I learned about Luke's real situation. Rachel called in January with interesting news. Luke had quit his job, or, more accurately, been forced out over some financial irregularities. His consulting business was failing, and he was borrowing money from everyone he could find. The desperate outreach started immediately. Mom sent sweet, manipulative messages about family being forever. Dad texted about being 2 months behind on the mortgage, asking for help just this once, as if I hadn't been helping for 5 years straight. But Luke's approach was the most revealing. He left a voicemail that I saved for future reference. "Hey Aaron, you've always been good with money, and I've got this business idea that could really take off. I just need startup capital. Maybe you'd want in on the ground floor like an investment." Not an apology, a pitch. He wanted me to fund his next venture while still believing I was the family disappointment. Then came the betrayal that shifted everything into legal territory. I was at work reviewing quarterly reports when I got a call from an unknown number. The voice was professional, but confused. "Aaron Miller, this is Kevin Brooks with Lakeshore Lending. We're calling about your recent mortgage application." My blood went cold. I didn't submit any application. The application submitted January 11th for a new loan on 324 Linton Avenue. That's your listed residence, correct? That was my address, my house that I'd worked overtime to afford. I didn't authorize any application. Send me the documentation immediately. 10 minutes later, the email arrived with a PDF that made me see red. My name and information were forged throughout the documents, along with Luke's signature and a fabricated income statement. He'd even included my private banking information, accounts I hadn't shared with anyone. The intended use was listed as capital for family business venture. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was attempted fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to encumber my property without consent. I immediately called Marissa Blake, a litigation attorney I'd worked with on several corporate cases. She owed me professional favors since my forensic analysis had helped her recover over $400,000 in hidden assets for her clients. "Marissa, I need consultation on a domestic fraud situation involving forged loan documents and identity theft," I explained, forwarding the evidence. Her response was immediate and strategic. "Aaron, with your documentation standards and the evidence quality, you're in an extremely strong position. This isn't just civil fraud, it's criminal. How loud do you want to be?" That phrase stuck with me. I'd spent my whole life quiet, avoiding confrontation, choosing peace. But they'd crossed from disrespect into actual crimes, and I had the professional resources to respond appropriately. First, I filed a police report for attempted identity theft and fraud. Then I had Marissa draft a cease and desist order, legally barring Luke from accessing any of my financial information or property. I froze all my credit accounts, changed every password, and set up fraud alerts on everything I owned. When Luke called 3 days later, I was ready. "Aaron, hey, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I know exactly what you did. I have the forged documents. The bank called me directly. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer." "Dude, come on, it wasn't like that. I just needed help and figured we'd both benefit." "You already committed fraud. You just didn't expect to get caught." His tone shifted fast. "Let's be real here. You've always had it easy. You live alone, no kids, no real responsibilities. You can afford to float some cash. I'm trying to build something that actually matters for once." That was the moment I realized he genuinely believed he was entitled to my life, my assets, my financial security. Because in his mind, he mattered more than I did. I hung up without another word. What followed was a masterclass in systematic consequences. I didn't just want Luke punished for the fraud. I wanted my entire family to understand exactly what they'd thrown away when they decided I was expendable. Using my professional network, I began building a comprehensive response strategy. Marcus Webb, a forensic accountant who'd worked on my corporate cases, agreed to analyze my family's complete financial situation. Jennifer Hayes, a private investigator who specialized in asset verification, began documenting Luke's actual income and spending patterns. The results were illuminating. Over 5 years, I'd contributed $156,000 to my parents' household, while Luke had contributed exactly nothing. Meanwhile, his credit card statements showed over $15,000 in discretionary spending during the same period he claimed to be financially struggling. But the real revelation came from Jennifer's investigation into Luke's business activities. His consulting company was essentially a shell operation. He'd been taking money from multiple investors for services he never delivered, borrowing against future earnings from the contracts that didn't exist. Within 6 weeks of my investigation, the consequences began cascading exactly as I'd predicted. Luke's fraud case moved through the system with mechanical precision. My documentation was so comprehensive that his plea bargain came with fines, probation, and a permanent record that would follow him throughout his career. My parents lost their house to foreclosure when they couldn't maintain payments without my subsidization. They were forced to move in with relatives out of state, sharing cramped quarters with extended family after years of taking their comfortable independence for granted. The social consequences were equally devastating. When the truth about Luke's fraud and my years of financial support became public record, their narrative about me being unstable collapsed completely. Church members, neighbors, and family friends learned that the troubled son had actually been the responsible one all along. But I wasn't finished. I wanted complete closure, not just legal victory. When their house went into foreclosure, I saw an opportunity for perfect poetic justice. Through an LLC I'd established for tax purposes, I placed the winning bid at the foreclosure auction. For $242,000, I purchased the house I'd been paying for anyway. The irony was sublime. They'd always said the house would go to Luke someday because he'd have a family and deserved the legacy. Now it belonged to me, legally, purchased with money I'd earned while they called me a burden. I had the locks changed, the utilities transferred to my name, and a formal eviction notice delivered by the sheriff. The letter was professionally worded by Marissa. This property is now under new ownership. All prior occupants must vacate immediately. There will be no extensions or exceptions. I happened to see them the day after they received the notice, standing outside a bank downtown, looking completely lost. My mother appeared pale and frantic. My father was rubbing his forehead, and Luke was red-faced on the phone, probably begging someone for help. When my mother spotted me across the street, she froze completely. Her lips parted like she might say something, but no words came. I held her gaze for a long moment, gave her the smallest nod of acknowledgement, then turned and walked away. That night, I received a desperate text from an unknown number. "Why are you doing this to us? We're still your family." I let it sit for a full day before responding. "No, you were my family. Then you showed me what that meant to you. This is me finally listening." They never contacted me again. 2 days later, they were gone from the house with no forwarding address. I walked through the empty rooms one final time, seeing childhood photos they'd left behind. Graduation pictures of Luke, family Christmas shots where I was half cut from the frame, a dusty shoebox with my name containing old report cards and drawings. I left it all there. That version of me, the one who craved their approval and tried to earn his place through financial sacrifice, didn't live there anymore. Instead of moving back in, I converted the house into something meaningful. I partnered with a local nonprofit to create transitional housing for young adults aging out of foster care. I established a trust fund in my grandfather's name to maintain the program indefinitely. The house that had once symbolized their control over me became a symbol of genuine family, providing second chances for people who'd never had first ones. 6 months later, I received one final envelope at my new address, handwritten and desperate, begging for reconciliation. I fed it directly into my shredder without reading a word. Luke's legal troubles followed him to his new job search. The fraud conviction made him virtually unemployable in any position requiring financial trust. My parents, forced to depend on relatives' charity, lost the social standing they'd valued so much. Meanwhile, my career flourished. The analytical skills I'd used to dismantle their assumptions about family hierarchy proved equally valuable in corporate advancement. I received a promotion to senior director, increasing my salary to $127,000 annually, and my forensic analysis consulting business now generates an additional $45,000 yearly. I joined a hiking group, started therapy to process years of emotional manipulation, and began dating someone who values my quiet competence rather than flashy performance. For the first time in my adult life, I'm building relationships with people who see my contributions clearly. The house now hosts 8 residents at any given time, young people transitioning from foster care to independent living. I visit occasionally in the evenings, seeing warm lights in the windows and hearing laughter that sounds nothing like the tense conversations that used to fill those rooms. Luke learned that his useful brother had been the foundation holding up his entire family's financial stability. Without my contributions and patience, he faced the full consequences of his actual capabilities and decision-making skills. My parents discovered that the son they'd dismissed as a burden possessed the exact resources and professional connections needed to hold their golden child accountable for criminal behavior. The final satisfaction came from a conversation with Rachel 6 months later. My mother had asked about me, wondering if I might consider reconciliation now that enough time had passed for emotions to settle. Rachel's response was perfect. "He's doing great, bought a bigger house, got promoted twice, and seems really happy. I don't think he thinks about you guys anymore." And that was the truth. I'd spent years wanting their recognition, their appreciation, their love. But I'd built a life so much better than anything they could offer that their approval had become irrelevant. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply removing yourself from people who don't value you and letting them discover exactly what they lost when you stop carrying their weight. I kept the business card from the foreclosure auction in my wallet for months afterward, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that quiet competence and strategic thinking will always triumph over arrogance and entitlement. They'd taught me that family was about blood and obligation. I'd learned that real family is about mutual respect and genuine appreciation. The difference between those lessons cost them everything and gave me the life I'd always deserved.